back to my channel. My name is Carly Stevens. I'm the author of the 10 UN Academy series, and this is English Nerd. So today I wanted to give you some book recommendations based on specific skills that you want to improve as a writer. This is the kind of thing that I definitely would have benefited from, and so I made a list of some of those common things that people do want to improve. Obviously, this is not a complete list. There's so many ways to improve as a writer, but I have plot, character, description, voice, world building, scene construction, just putting it together really nicely. And so hopefully these recommendations will help you out. So I have a mix of modern books and classic books that have just done this super, super well in the past. And so I hope that this list is helpful for you. So in no particular order, we are going to begin with description. If that's something that you kind of struggle to do in a meaningful way, some of the works that have helped me in different ways have been these. Honestly, one of the most helpful has been Fahrenheit 451. If you've read Bradbury's stuff, then you know that he naturally, like his style is pretty descriptive, but there is not that kind of, you know, sometimes when you have descriptive works and the plot sort of suffers because people are just getting so fancy. Bradbury doesn't have that problem, in my opinion. The story goes on at a good pace, and yet we still get immersed in this beautiful description. Another book that you might want to consider for description is The Picture of Dorian Gray. Oscar Wilde has this really beautiful prose in this story. It's very different from his plays, so if you're familiar with those, Picture of Dorian Gray is just kind of a sumptuous read, so if you like a bit more purple prose, then this is a good example of that. And then The Night Circus. This is an example of a book that does sacrifice plot for description, so you wouldn't have to read this entire thing to get some descriptive tips, I guess, but it is great with imagery, just absolutely beautiful. It puts you in the location in a way that is very, it's more than realistic. It's evocative. So that's a slightly better word. So that's another example, and it's a great moody October read as well. This entire list, by the way, is super helpful for Preptober if you're planning on participating in NaNoWriMo. Okay, my next couple recommendations are for those who want to improve in their ability to create characters. Now, some of these works obviously could help with variety of these issues, but some of the recommendations I have specifically for character are these. The Raven Boys by Maggie Stiefvater. I've brought this up on the channel before. I've brought most of these up on the channel before because they're just good recommendations. But The Raven Boys, it has an odd plot, but the characters stick with you like you would not believe. I mean, they are just so impeccably done. The four Raven Boys and then Blue Sergeant, whom they meet as well. So it's another great October read. It's a little bit spooky, a little bit weird, but the characters are absolutely outstanding. So I'd recommend that one. As far as a classic goes that does this better than almost anybody else, I was torn between two writers. Dickens is really good as well, so if you want to pick up a copy of A Tale of Two Cities or his personal favorite and one of my personal favorites, David Copperfield, those are wonderful for description, or I'm sorry, for character. But Crime and Punishment is the one that I ultimately chose as a classic to represent this because Dostoevsky creates characters that are so realistic and so self-contradictory in the way that people are self-contradictory, not in the way that characters tend to be. So it doesn't come across as a weak character. In fact, it comes across as actual people. I am just completely floored by Dostoevsky's ability to do this. So Crime and Punishment's a great example. The Brothers Karamazov, also by Dostoevsky, is another great example of some of the best character creation I've ever seen, and I've read quite a lot. Okay, so the next skill that you might want to improve in your own writing would be voice. Voice is that kind of nebulous idea. What do your books sound like? What is the way that you write or the way that you speak? Obviously, there are a lot of options here. Some people go with the way that they speak verbally, but if you're still kind of developing your voice and you're not sure what that actually means or what some of the options are, then I have some good recommendations for you. Okay, the first one is Strange the Dreamer by Laini Taylor. It is absolutely beautiful. The voice is unusual. It's gorgeous. It's well put together. It's another example of a book that doesn't slow down the action in favor of a really beautiful and unique voice. So Strange the Dreamer, highly, highly recommended. For a very different voice, and you might as well read a variety of these to get a good sense of some of your options, of course, would be Their Eyes Were Watching God by Zora Neale Hurston. So this one has another unique voice. I've never heard anything quite like it. And I would suggest that you do read a variety of different voices and decide what you like. Some people really enjoy the descriptive, beautiful language in this. Other people don't like it, and that's okay. Some people absolutely love the more stark, coming-of-age prose in this. Other people don't so much. So try this out and see. My last classic recommendation, in addition to this one, would be Edgar Allan Poe. He was a master of voice. It is another that is extremely distinct. You know exactly what you're reading when you're reading it. And so I'd recommend going and reading some of those short stories. The Telltale Heart, if you've never read The Telltale Heart, it's only, 10 pages or something. It's been a while since I've read it, so maybe it's not quite that range, but it's really short, and it gives you another wonderful example of voice. So, on to crafting scenes. So if you are looking to craft a scene that has an impressive emotional punch, or it really just is so well put together. You know those scenes when you're writing or you're watching a movie and you just go, "Oh my gosh, that was incredible." If you want to have some examples of those, Six of Crows and Crooked Kingdom are by Leigh Bardugo, have quite a few of those scenes that are complex to put together from the author perspective, but just come together so beautifully and seamlessly. And I've even marked one of them. It's the bathroom scene with Kaz and Inej from Crooked Kingdom, because that one, it combines not a lot of action, but it keeps you on the edge of your seat with these flashbacks and things that wouldn't ordinarily work, but it's this scene that is just masterful. So anyway, I'd recommend that. I have a lot of young adult fantasy in here, which I guess shouldn't surprise anybody who's been around my channel. I write young adult fantasy, I read young adult fantasy, but there are some wonderful works in that genre that make it absolutely worth the read. Okay, another work that I would recommend for scenes would be the Scorpio races. This one, I suppose I could have put it in a few different categories, voice or whatever, but the action of Scorpio races is pretty simple most of the time, but the scenes are so well put together, the combination of characters, thoughts, action, dialogue, that it just comes together absolutely beautifully. So this is another wonderful October read. I didn't actually plan on having all of these be perfect fall books, but as I'm looking around, most of them are really perfect for when it starts getting colder and a little chillier. So the Scorpio races this one took me by surprise. I did not expect to like this one as much as I did. It is outstanding. Okay, moving on to plot. So if you're struggling to come up with a plot that pulls together at the end and stays consistent all throughout, and just how do you put together a plot? One that I would recommend is Sherlock Holmes. I guess a couple more specifically, since there are a lot of Sherlock Holmes, is just volume 1 and it's pretty chunky. The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes, which is the first set of short stories where Watson meets Holmes and you have some of the most famous mysteries, would be a great option because you have just very tight plotting in short spaces with those stories. If you want something that's a bit longer, his novels are a little bit more hit and miss. I really liked Sign of Four until the end, and then the plotting gets kind of sloppy. So I think a better example of that from Arthur Conan Doyle would be The Hound of the Baskervilles. Yes, it's a classic. Yes, a bunch of people read it, but there's a reason. It's really fun. It's plotted really well, and it has a little bit of that creepy factor. So definitely recommend Sherlock Holmes for plot. Another series that is just so beautifully plotted is Harry Potter, which I know is also incredibly cliche. I didn't see it with the first book, I'll be honest. With the first book and the first movie, I just was not 100% on board. I thought it was kind of random and not all that well put together. But if you've read the books, especially, the movies are good, but and I don't always say this, the books are better. They actually are. So if you read the books and you get to the end, you'll see that there were hints all the way back to the early books about what was going to happen, and it's just a gorgeous example of foreshadowing and following through on different narrative promises like you want to do with a plot. And so it's very nicely put together, and it is also plotted a lot like a mystery, even though it's definitely a fantasy. The way that it holds together is very much like a mystery, which could help you with your own plotting, using some of those skills and then putting them with whatever framework you choose to write. So, Harry Potter. Next up, I have pacing. So if you struggle with pacing, maybe you have sluggish middle section. If you're writing a novel, it's easy to just jump out of the gate and be super exciting and maybe have an idea for an ending that's really excellent, but then you have a bit of that saggy middle, what do you do? Then I have some recommendations for you. The first one is Aurora Rising from the Aurora cycle by Amie Kaufmann and J. Kristoff. In fact, I've read 5 books that they've written together now, and all of them are just, they raise the stakes and they raise the stakes, and you never quite get a breath. You have to go through them super quickly. But I prefer the Aurora cycle to the Illumini Files personally, although the Illumini Files were really fascinating in their own right. So Aurora Rising, the pacing is excellent. I flew through them, and that was exactly what they wanted me to do. Another book series that is excellent at pacing, and I think gets even better as the books go onward, is The Lunar Chronicles. So Cinder, Scarlet, Cress, and Winter. It looks like it's a super girly series with the high heel and everything, but it's incredibly Star Wars-y. So guys out there, give it a shot, and you'll see what you think. But the pacing in this is amazing. I went through Winter, the final book in the series, which is over 800 pages, in just a few days. I was listening to the audiobook, which is great, and I was listening to it for hours a day. I could not get enough. And so the tension was clearly present through the entire thing. One thing I like a ton of things about Lunar Chronicles. I was wondering which category to put this in, because it could fall into quite a few. But one thing I like about the Lunar Chronicles that is not present as much in the Aurora cycle, I guess both of them are sci-fi, now that I'm thinking about it. But the Lunar Chronicles give a little bit more breathing time. So it keeps your interest, yes, but then there's a little bit of time to react, recover, respond to what happened, and then something new happens, and it goes on like that. The Aurora books are a bit more breakneck. You don't have that much time to really sit in any of what's happened, because now there's something else that's going on. Okay, finally, world building. If you struggle with world building, I have 2 very different classic recommendations for you. Some of the most famous, effective world building. These books have been so effective at what they've done that basically we as an American culture have almost taken these worlds to exist. It's like part of our own world in a way. So the first recommendation I have is George Orwell's 1984. It is a dystopian book, of course, looking at a kind of Stalinistic future where everything is being watched, and it bears a striking resemblance in some ways to our own world, which assists with that world building, but it definitely is its own entity. The world is split up in a very different way. The way that society functions is fundamentally different. It's structured differently. So this is a great example. You can get an idea just from the first chapter, even how that world building works, the different elements that are worked in, and it's a lot of small elements and small details that really bring this world to life. I mean, you hear people talk about it as though it's actually happening. So you have 1984, and then finally, last but not least, you have, yes, J.R.R. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings. I've discovered I'm a purist. I really, really love Lord of the Rings. The Hobbit is fine. The Silmarillion is complicated, but Lord of the Rings basically changed my life. It's absolutely brilliant. You don't need to create an entire culture with languages and maps and histories and all of that before you begin writing your work. Do not feel that kind of pressure. But if you read The Lord of the Rings, then you'll see how having that background, hearkening back to these really deep elements of culture can make in this case, Middle Earth, come alive in a way that it doesn't if all you see is the very, very surface of the world. So those are my book recommendations based on specific writing skills that you want to improve. I would love to hear your recommendations down in the comments if you were expecting a book to come up in a certain category and it didn't, which is very possible. Then add that down below. Help out your fellow authors. Like this video if you like it, and do not forget to subscribe for more English nerdy goodness. All right, I'll see you next Monday. Bye.